Okay, everyone, welcome back to B-Spec Productions. I'm Spec Son, coming to you with another cool video, this time concerning WCW 1991. I'm going to give the top 5 things that I disliked about the company. In another video, I'm going to talk about the top 5 things that I liked about the company in that particular year of 1991, all of which are going to be a precursor to the spec reviews that will be coming out very shortly. I've already completed it, although I have a little bit of editing stuff to still do with it before I upload it. It's going to be about 45 minutes long. It's going to be split up into 4 different parts, but it's going to concern WCW of 1991. It's going to be a really cool video and something that I really have tried to do for over a year, and I finally found the time, made the time to do it. So check that out very shortly. But before I do all of that, I'm going to concentrate on this particular video right here. And as I mentioned, the top 5 things that I dislike about World Championship Wrestling in the year 1991. And I've been on record, folks, saying over and over again, WCW 1991 is arguably my favorite year in the business for any company. And I'm not going to sugarcoat anything concerning the top 5 things that I like and dislike. There's things that I like and things that I dislike, and bottom line is, I may have loved the company in 91, but there were some atrocious things that occurred in 1991 in WCW. And I'm going to start right now by going, not necessarily in ascending order, but descending order. I'm going from 5 all the way to 1. And I encourage everybody to do that as well on my YouTube channel, in the comment section, also the message boards, ROHWrestling.com, under the thread that I made for this particular topic. So, let's start it. Number 5, and the thing that I dislike most by WCW in 1991, without a doubt, Ric Steiner in Limbo. Now you say to myself, hey Spec, Ric Steiner in Limbo? Wasn't he part of the Steiner brothers? Didn't he have a really phenomenal run as the IWGP Tag Team Champion, the United States Tag Team Champion, also World Tag Team Champion with Scott? Well, that was the first half of 1991. The back end of 1991 was a completely different story. After Scott got injured by the hardliners, Dirty Dick Slater and Dick Murdoch, Ric Steiner was on his own. He wanted revenge. But before he was able to get the revenge, he tagged up with Missy Hyatt in a ridiculous match between Missy Hyatt and Rick versus Paulie Dangerously and Arn Anderson that main evented the Great American Bash in 1991. That just goes to show you how so many people, why so many people regard that pay-per-view as one of the worst of all time. That main event at the pay-per-view. And even after that, though, since Scott is unable to compete and Rick is all by himself on island by himself, after 30 days he's stripped of the World Tag Team Championship. Actually, the hosts, the Steiner brothers, were stripped of the tag titles. Their tournament was made. Excuse me, a tournament was made that lasted from the summer all the way until the fall of 1991. And Rick wanted to be in this tournament, but he wanted a partner. Since it can't be Scott, he found Bill Kazmaier. Now, for those who don't know Bill Kazmaier and don't follow big man competitions in the world of bodybuilding and the world of strongmen, Bill Kazmaier held so many different Guinness World Records at that specific time in strongman competitions. He even did some strongman commentating when ESPN was covering it several years ago. But that's what he was known for. He did not belong in a wrestling ring. He was a horrible wrestler. But they ended up going to the finals against the new tag team combination of Arn Anderson and Larry Zbyszko, known as the Enforcers, who became the tag team of the year in PWI. Phenomenal tag team. But there was just nothing there, really. Bill Kazmaier tried to attempt another world record, and then he was brutally attacked after he successfully completed that task in breaking the record. He was attacked by Arn Anderson and Larry Zbyszko at the Clash of the Champions Fall Brawl, which that match actually took place in the tournament final. But prior to it, he was attacked, and he tried to wrestle injured. Ric Steiner kept trying to tell him, no, I'll wrestle for you. You stay outside. And then he eventually tags Rick, right in the back, and ends up losing the match for the team. And then the Enforcers went on to capture the World Tag Team titles during that night. But you heard a little bit more about Bill Kazmaier towards the end. I think Bill wanted to try out wrestling, but he really wasn't great. He really did nothing good for Rick Steiner. My take on the whole Rick Steiner and Limbo situation in 1991 in World Championship Wrestling is this. It had been over 2 years since he wrestled in a singles capacity on a regular basis. Not to say that the Steiner brothers were worn out. It's just that this gave Rick an opportunity to do something different that he actually succeeded in earlier in his career as a singles wrestler. People who saw it back then could never forget the whole stuff with his talking hand Alex in late '88 when he left the Varsity Club and on to winning the TV championship at Starrcade '88 against Mike Rotunda. I mean, this guy had a lot of charisma if you put him in a certain situation. And I think they made a mistake by not capitalizing that with Rick in 1991 on the singles level. Coming in at number 4 on my list, Bad Gimmicks. Now, who can forget the Bad Gimmicks who watched at the time of WCW in 1991? Now, a lot of people put this on Jim Herd. I'm one of them. But I also have to probably give some blame to the American Dream Dusty Rhodes, who became booker of the company in January of '91 all the way throughout the year. Because a lot of the characters kind of symbolize themselves in some degree. Now, I'm going to just name off a few names, and you tell me if these guys were actually good if you have seen some of their matches and seen their personas. Oz, Vinny Vegas, who was played by Kevin Nash. The fact that Kevin Nash had 2 different roles in 1991, 2 different gimmicks, speaks volumes of how bad he was used in 1991. Big Josh, a.k.a. Doink the Clown, eventually became Doink the Clown. Mike Warren, he dressed. I mean, his whole persona was being this big, tough outdoorsman who was a good guy and would beat you up if you tried to double cross him, and just it was a horrible character. Although I would say the character actually got over a little bit in some markets, but to me it was a doomed character, and that's exactly what it was. It was doomed very, very quickly. It lasted throughout 1991, but there was really no traction there. The Yellow Dog, played by Brian Pillman. Now, Brian Pillman was told, after losing a match against Barry Windham and Arn Anderson, when his tag team partner was Elegante at the Clash of the Champions prior to the Great American Bash of 1991. Since the stipulation was if Brian Pillman and Elegante lost that match, Brian Pillman would have to leave WCW for 90 days. That's exactly what happened, and he resurfaced as the Yellow Dog. Not officially, but unofficially, he was Brian Pillman with a yellow mask on, acting like a dog. And it was horrible. Absolutely horrible. Did not get over well at all. Until he eventually came back as Brian Pillman. Van Hammer came to the ring, big hair, guitar in hand, total 80s rock band ripoff kind of guy. Actually carved out a pretty good career for himself in the world of wrestling. Went to after his stint with WCW, he resurfaced in WCW in the late 90s. Still performing. Amazingly, he was able to keep himself relevant. Never thought that would happen, but he didn't have great matches at all, and his character really had no traction too. And the last one I will mention is PNU's, the Rapmaster PNU's, a big black guy coming to the ring with the 90s spandex attire, 400-pounder, would do the Rapmaster PNU's gimmick like that off the top rope, his finishing maneuver, right before his matches would end in when he was facing squash opponents, jobbers and squash matches, excuse me. His music will be playing. It was just crazy. Just absolutely crazy. The music will start right before he gets on the top rope to his finisher, which was a big splash off the top. And Jim Ross in his infinite wisdom tried to put him over as much as he could, and it just never worked. PNU's claim to fame were 2 things. His storyline with Johnny B. Bad, which really wasn't good. And his second one was the infamous scaffold match between him and Bobby Eaton and Stunning Steve Austin and Terrence Taylor at the Great American Bash 91. Once again, I mentioned the Great American Bash 1991. That in itself could be on this list. Number 3, coming in at number 3 is the Paulie Dangerously and the Missy Hyatt feud, which lasted pretty much throughout the duration of the summer of 1991 and culminated at the Great American Bash in the main event with Arn Anderson and Paulie Dangerously against Missy Hyatt and Ric Steiner. Long story short, Missy Hyatt was pretty much pissed off at Paulie for beating up her then so-called boyfriend Jason Harvey of the Wonder Years and the classic ABC show. And Jason, everybody, if you followed wrestling at the time, you've seen a lot of the pay-per-views. Jason Harvey will always be at the pay-per-views, it seemed. He was a big fan of the NWA/WCW, and he just happened to so-called go out with Missy Hyatt. So, and by the way, I just think this was an opportunity to incorporate Harvey in the storyline. But in the Clash of the Champions, Jason Harvey is interviewed by Paulie Dangerously. Paulie Dangerously, one of his final dangerous, is one of his final, what do you call it, Danger Zone programs that he would do, kind of like an interview segment. Same thing that Terry Funk had with the Funk Grill and stuff like that. But anyway, long story short, Harvey is attacked by Paulie after the interview. Paulie takes one of his Zach Morris light phones and just cracks the skull of Jason Harvey. Boom! Just cracks his skull. Boom! And that kind of pissed off Missy Hyatt, and Missy Hyatt started beating up Paulie on television here and there, and they had their little cat fight, so to speak, to the point where that match took place. And just a bad way to use Paulie, who's such a really good talent. He did a lot of good stuff as an announcer, but he was a manager, and we would see that in 1991. When I talk about some of my greatest things in 91, him coming back to being a manager. And Missy really just, I wouldn't say she didn't amount to much after that, but she just became, what she was before in early 91. Just, the host of the Power Hour with Jim Ross, and also she would, be like a hostess of a pay-per-view, or, doing a lot of, I wouldn't say vignettes, but, like interviews with some of the wrestlers. Alright, coming in number 2, Bobby Eaton, short reign as a TV champion. Now, he won the title from Arn Anderson at Super Bowl 91, and that's after a very, very long stint at being a tag team wrestler. First championship he won in over 10 years since he was in Georgia Championship Wrestling. He won the television championship in a great match with Arn, and he loses it to a newcomer in Stunning Steve Austin. Nothing against Austin, a phenomenal talent, even at that time. However, Bobby didn't get his just due as a champion. It would have been great to see him hold that belt for at least 3 or 4 more months to see where he would progress. His interviews was getting better. His work ring as a singles wrestler was getting better. I just would have liked to have seen the maturity of his single character. Now, coming in at number 1 is, I think, will be a number 1 on a lot of guys and gals lists. Ric Flair leaving WCW. Now, a lot of this wasn't really on Ric Flair. It was more on Jim Herd and the people that were doing the whole contract negotiations, or lack thereof. Ric Flair's contract was ending in, I believe it was June, or I think it was July 1st of 1991. And Jim Herd had tried to put it off and put it off and put it off, and eventually Ric Flair had enough of it and said, all right, this is the final straw. I want my contract up, negotiated, not necessarily renewed, but negotiated prior to the Great American Bash pay-per-view that was supposed to take place. That did take place. I believe it was July 14th, 1991. That the main event was scheduled was scheduled to be Barry Windham against Ric Flair, a pupil against student. However, that did not take place. And I think I can go a long, long way about talking about the background behind that whole incident. But the bottom line is Ric Flair left the company. WCW was forced to scramble up things. They decided to have a match between the top 2 contenders in the WCW top 10, which was an awesome idea, by the way, between Barry Windham and Lex Luger. And eventually, you know, not going to talk about the end of that match, but throughout the duration of that match, Ric Flair chants were all over the place in the Baltimore arena. So the absence of Ric Flair closed the doors for some people, and it opened the doors for a lot more people, and I will discuss that in the next video, my top 5. things that I loved about WCW 1991. I'll be back in the short.